Hello guys and welcome for another New World Aeternum video. In the last couple of weeks I've made few videos with the idea of explaining the core game mechanics to all new players as well as those who were gone for a while but now decided to come back to the game. So far we've discussed what are the main differences between armor and resistance when it comes to maximizing your defense potential, what is the use for all of the different gems for your gear and which ones you should prioritize using, as well as the quick and summarized buff and debuff tutorial backed up by a whole spreadsheet provided by my dear friend Ayub. I also touched a bit on the perks for the different armor pieces and what people usually aim to use in the current meta, and in the last video I spoke also about the jewelry pieces and their respective perks. So as you can imagine, today we are moving one step forward and this one is quite a big one, as we will take a look on the weapon perks in the game. Again, the idea will be for me to provide you some knowledge so you can filter the good ones from the bad ones when it comes to building your character. Also, I will try to give different examples where perks can be extremely powerful on a specific weapon, but the same can be almost useless on other ones. If you are new to the channel or you are already familiar with it but you still didn't subscribe to it, maybe now is the best time to do so. By just a simple click, you will help me and our nice community to grow and of course to reach even more people. For everyone who is already a part of that amazing journey, I just want to say big thank you. Now let's head back to our topic for today, which was the weapon perks in New World Aeternum. Same as the armor and jewelry perks, here the system of combining perks works the same way. You have the labels or the so-called perk buckets in which you have a variety of choice and you can slot one of those perks. However, with the weapons the system goes a bit further and also adds perks which are unique to the melee weapons, magic or ranged weapons, and of course the healing ones. Due to that additional complication, today we will take a look at all the perks together and we will separate them in different categories by melee weapons, magical and ranged weapons, and of course healing ones. I will also try to give you different examples of perks which are unique entries for any of the given categories. Okay guys, so as you can see, it looks quite complicated when we are looking at the melee weapon perks because there are so many. But don't worry about it because I will try to make it as simple as possible and I will of course go over every single one of them, segregating them by the labels or the so-called perk buckets so we can have a better picture for everything that's to come. So the first perk bucket that we're gonna take a look at is the damage con one, because in my opinion this one is the most important when it comes to weapons as it directly improves and of course inflicts extra damage. So therefore this is the first thing that you want to of course apply. The first perk here is Vicious, the second is Enchanted, then we have Rogue, Thwarting Counter, Thwarting Strikes, Transient Strikes, Transient Crits, Transient Rend, Transient Recovery, Disdained Infliction, Desperate Empower, and Alternating Enchantment. Let me just switch their places. So going one by one, I think that Vicious, for example, was a great perk before the nerf, which was quite a long time ago already, but before this perk was giving 12% critical damage, now it only gives 7%, and due to the system of mitigating in damage and the critical hits, I think that this perk can only probably get some value when it's used on a sword and shield because of the extra perks on the shield, or maybe a hatchet because the hatchets when they use berserk they get higher values in critical damage. For all other weapons, even for the magical ones which we're gonna speak later, I think that Vicious doesn't really have too much of an effect simply because the mitigation of critical hits through all other classes of weight, even in light, is quite high and therefore your critical damage is not so big to invest into Vicious. I would personally put it in B tier, but of course, like I said, for Sword and Shield and Hatchet, probably it can go up to A tier depending on the build and of course depending on the player. Now the second one that we're gonna look at is the Enchanted. Enchanted, same as Vicious, was super nice at some point. I think that lately it kind of lost its value simply because there is new perks added to the mix, of course, in the game. And due to that, of course, Enchanted lost a little bit of power, but still, Enchanted will give you additional damage to all light and heavy attacks, which technically means that if you play a really heavy focused on light and heavy attacks build, this would be efficient and quite good for the long run. Now, I personally would slot it again around the B tier simply because, in my opinion, it can only suit a couple of weapons. Again, Sword and Shield would be one of them, because you can also share this perk with your shield, meaning that you can get even higher damage potential. But apart from the sword, I really don't see where it can have a big impact. Maybe in a specific spear build, maybe for PvE, because you will see that some of the perks are only working for PvP. But regardless of that, I think that Enchanted is just suited for the B class. Now the next one is Rogue. And in my opinion, for a couple of weapons like the rapier or the spear, this perk can be extremely powerful. The reason for that is because Rogue will give you additional damage on back hits or backstabs, which means that if you are chasing and you are playing an assassin type of a class or a build, you will have a lot of value from this perk. Now, as you can imagine, if you hit a target in front and there is no backstabs, this perk will be completely useless. But I would say that it's probably high B tier or even down to like A minus, something like that. Because, like I said, it's useful for all types of assassin builds. And as we know, currently there are a couple of assassin builds that are running wild. This also can be used for Sword and Shield. It also can be used for hatchet players. The already mentioned spear and rapier, and as you can see, already 4 weapons being able to use it well, I think that it deserves the at least A tier. The next one that we're gonna talk about is Thwarting Counter. Now, of course, those perks here, plus the alternating enchantment, and of course the enchanted, they kind of look the same, so that's why I'm going one by one and also showing you them, guys, because I know it's a bit confusing sometimes, especially for a newer player or a beginner completely, to make a to differ between the different perks. So the next one, Thwarting Counter, is giving you 22 additional percentage of damage while you are attacking grid targets. Now, what is grid is a completely different topic, but quickly to explain it, different attacks when you have 300 constitution, different abilities, or even weapons can have grid while performing one of those 2 that I've mentioned. And you can easily notice this by looking at the character, because he will have a glowing white aura around his body. So this means that the target has grit. And you can also notice that because you cannot stagger or push back or knock down the target while he has active grit. The only thing that you can do is to root or to stun them. So the Thwarting Counter, to get back on the perk, will give you 22% damage against target with active grit. Now the problem is that not many targets have active grid all the time, but of course in some builds you can see almost all the time grid being active. Like this build can be Void Gauntlet that is using the Void Blade with 300 constitution, and if you feel like you are fighting quite a lot of those guys, maybe this perk won't be a bad choice to slot it, in your weapon. However, I think that this is a bit of an unpopular pick, and I think that it's really niche when it comes to be useful. Maybe if you play in a war scenario and you know that all of the bruisers around you would have almost all the time active grit, maybe you can go with that perk, but still, I don't think that many people are choosing this over the other choices. So I would place it somewhere in C, maybe C+, but not higher than this. The next one is Thwarting Strikes. Now this one is a bit more popular. This gives you 7% damage increase while you have active grit. Now here the things are a bit different. The percentage of damage is lower, but it's on you. So when you have the grit, you do this extra damage, which is way better because it's you the one deciding when to get the damage boost. So as you can imagine, this is really useful for all those bruisers that I've mentioned already, the guys that are using consistently grit. And you can see this one being quite a lot used, especially for those classes, the bruisers that are running with hammers or even with void blades and stuff like this. So I would say that Thwarting Strikes is definitely a nice choice. And then the next one is Trenchant Strikes, which are really similar ones, but not exactly the same. Trenchant Strikes will give you heavy melee attacks, will deal 23% damage. Now, this is not related to grit. It doesn't need to be grit on you or the enemy, but it's only 23% damage when you do a heavy attack. Now, as you can imagine, you can do quite a lot of quick heavy attacks with certain weapons. For example, the sword and shield. The sword has the quickest heavy attack in the game. I'm not really sure if you can put those, the last one and this one, on Void Blade, but I think that for sword and shield, for example, this perk can be extremely powerful. And the other weapon that has also an amazing heavy attack is the Warhammer, because the tracking of it and of course the quick cancel of the full animation is really good. So I would say that this perk goes to A, maybe even A+, close to S tier already, because it's extremely valuable. The only reason that I would not slot it on S tier is simply because it's not an overall perk for any melee weapon out there, but definitely for the ones that are having a quick melee attack, this is probably the best choice. And then we go for the next one, which is Trenchant Crits. This one will again boost the heavy melee attacks, as they will deal 34% increased critical damage. Now, as I said, the critical damage in the game was once really powerful, but lately with some changes and some additions to the game, the critical damage kind of fell down a bit. It's not like it's not useful, it's not like you don't do extra damage, it's just that it's not so impactful as before. So if you feel like you are having extremely good critical damage and you do heavy attacks, then this might be a good choice. But I, for myself, and of course I'm a mage, I'm not a melee specialist, but I for myself cannot really think about a build that exploits heavy attacks and high critical damage at the same time. So that's why I would say that Trenchant Crits, it's probably sitting better in the B tier. The next one, Trenchant Rend, as the name suggests, is again heavy attack related. So heavy melee attacks will inflict rend for 7 seconds, reducing the target's armor by 16%, and the cooldown of this perk will be only 10 seconds. Now, as I've mentioned already, heavy attacks on weapons that are quick enough, like the sword, like the hammer, can utilize such perk quite efficiently, and this is an extremely powerful tool. Now, that's one of the reasons to place it on A tier, but also another could be that this would increase your damage follow-up after this perk, simply because you're gonna rend your target for those 16%. Now, of course, if you don't know what is rend, I would suggest you to go and check one of my previous videos about the buffs and the debuffs. But in short, basically you are stripping down the armor of your target, so therefore your follow-up damage in those 7 seconds will be higher. In my opinion, for Sword and Shield and for Hammer, this perk is a A+. For the others, it's a bit situational, but could be also used. The next one is Trenchant Recovery, which again is related to heavy attacks. And as you can imagine, recovery is related as well to healing. So this one will heal you for 25% of the damage dealt by heavy attacks. Now, weapons that have quick heavy attacks and they want to be a frontliner could benefit from this extremely well. And I'm pretty sure that you are already thinking about one such weapon, and that could be the Greatsword. And of course, it can also be the Warhammer, but why not the Sword and Shield as well? So in my opinion, those three weapons can be really useful with this perk specifically, as long as you want to be the front line and you want to survive for as long as possible. If you are focusing on damage, you don't really want to get HP back, of course, and you would look for something else. But if you want to be the tank, if you want to be the front line, then this probably is a really good example. And that's why I'm placing it on the A tier. The next one, we are exiting the Trenchant perks. We are going further to different ones, which are not related to heavy attacks, but still quite useful perks. And the next in line is the Disdained Infliction. Now, this perk was introduced to the game when the Gorgon's Hive of Gorgons raid was introduced in the game. And this one will give you a potency of outgoing dots are increased by 15%, And of course, it will deal additional damage to AI, which is in PvE, but we are specifically talking about PvP. So basically, your dots will have 15% more power. Potency stands for power. Now, this perk, as you can imagine, can be quite useful for dot builds. If you play Spear with Bleed, or if you play Rapier with Bleed, or if you play maybe even Butcher, which is the artifact for Sword with Bleed again, this perk might be quite good. Unfortunately, my opinion is such that the bleed builds and all other dot builds in the game are not so efficient when it comes to damage because of how healing works, and I've always prioritized the burst damage over the bleeds. In my opinion, this perk goes down to C tier simply because of that, but of course, again, if you have a really specific build that is utilizing the bleeds or any other dots, definitely this perk might be the best for you, so pick and choose, now you know how it works. The next one is Desperate Empower. This one is a bit of a meme, but I've seen even some people using it. In short, it will give you 12% Empower and 7% haste while exhausted. Now the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is exhausted? And this is maybe the reason why I don't like this perk so much. Exhausted means that you don't have any stamina in you. This, of course, can happen when you dodge 2 or 3 times in a row and your stamina goes to completely zero. People also call it gray bar, of course. So then you would have to wait all that time for your stamina to recover from zero to maximum. And in that time frame, you would not be able to dodge, you would not be able to block, you would not be also able to run quick because you would have a penalty of slow. It's not that big of a slow, but still there is a penalty. Now here, as you can see, you get 7.2% haste, which might, give you a bit of chance to recover from the slow. But I don't think that sharing 12% empower with all the other empower types and ways to get empower is nice when you have to basically sacrifice all of your stamina. In my opinion, this perk is the worst from all of the ones that we already spoke about and the ones that we're gonna speak about later on as well. But of course, some people might find some use for it. And if you do, then definitely share it with us so we can see it as well how it works. And then the last perk from this list of the damage con is the Alternating Enchantment. Now this perk is a new addition. This one came in from the last big patch, I believe with Season 8. And it was quite hard to obtain, but now with Season 9, especially with the new changes, it's really easy to obtain. This perk basically will give you bonus damage whenever you hit an ability on a target. It will give you bonus damage to your next basic attack, and if you hit a basic attack, it will give you bonus damage on your next ability. So as you can imagine, weapons which are non-stop making combos between basic attacks and abilities, and the best example I can give right now is Spear, can have a really high uptime on that perk, and of course really high results and value from it. In my opinion, this perk goes to S tier, especially for, like I said, weapons that are utilizing it quite efficiently between attacks and of course abilities. And I'm putting it on S tier not because it's useful for all the different melee weapons out there, but simply because the value of those 10% is quite high. Now, one thing just to mention is that 10% of base damage compared to 10% in power is much more value because the base damage in the game is really hard to find. While Empower has many different sources and different perks that can give you Empower, base damage is just so hard to find. On top of that, Empower has a cap of 50%, while base damage doesn't really have a cap, or at least I don't know for one. So this is the reason why I'm placing it on S tier. Of course, if you play Rapier, for example, this probably would not be the best thing to do, but as I said, it's just the value of the damage. Okay, so those were the perks from the damage con for all melee weapons, and now we are going to the second one, the second perk bucket, which is also quite big one with a lot of perks in it, and this, of course, is the proc. So starting off with the first one, we have Refreshing Move, and for those of you who don't know what exactly this perk does, light and heavy attacks will reduce your active cooldowns by 2.5%, and there is an internal cooldown of the ability with 0.2 seconds, which means that if you hit 2 targets at the same time, you would not get 5% cooldown reduction, but only one time 2.5%. So basically this perk has been one of the best when it comes to bruisers, especially for great axe users, from day one up until now. And I think that even not only the bruisers, but even on some other weapons, even on some spears sometimes, this can be really, really powerful perk. Now, of course, it really depends what exactly you are playing and what exactly you are aiming for, but in my opinion, Refreshing Move basically stands really strong on A tier, and it will probably remain there for quite some time because how the PvP in mass scale works. Like it's just so powerful and so useful perk. So I definitely think that it's a hard A tier. The next one that we have in the procs is the life stealing. Life stealing has, as you can imagine, heals back 7% of your damage dealt to enemies, and of course this is not affected by any dots, it's just a direct damage. Now, same as Transient Recovery, for example, if you didn't forget what is Transient Recovery already, this one can give you a smaller percentage of recovery of damage to health, but of course it works on basically everything. It works on light attacks, it works on heavies, and it also works on abilities. So I personally think that if you are running something which is focused on solo sustain, if you don't have a friend who is a healer and you really enjoy solo play, this might be a really good perk for you. Of course, you want to combine it with some other perks to increase that life stealing efficiency. But I would place it probably on a high B, maybe even close to A tier, depending on your build. But let's just place it on the B so we can have even perks between A and B tier here for the moment. The next one is Keenly Jacked. This is an amazing perk. As this one will inflict a bleed on a critical hit, dealing 10% of your weapon damage for 6 seconds, and it has a 7 seconds cooldown. Now, how exactly does it work? Let me try to explain it even more simple. Whenever you do a critical hit on a target, he will start bleeding for 10% of your weapon damage, which means that if your weapon damage is, let's say, high, and then the bleed will be higher, this would basically put a lot of pressure to the enemy. This perk is extremely powerful on muskets and bows for that exact reason, because bows and muskets have a general high base damage, and the bleed is just even stronger than any other weapon out there. So I definitely think that this perk can be A to even A plus, if not even S tier for those specific builds. But as we are speaking about melees for the moment and not ranged, I think that it only stops at A simply because there are not so many weapons that can utilize it. Of course, Sword and Shield again can be utilizing it because of the extra perks on the shield. Spear is a really nice candidate, especially if you run Finisher as a secondary. Again, Finisher can be, of course, utilizing this perk as well, because Finisher deals 15% increased damage to bleeding targets, and so on and so on. So I personally think that Keenly Jacked is definitely standing in A tier for that extra damage. The next perk is again something that is related to Keen, and then of course Keenly Fortified. Now this perk will basically provide 15% Fortify for 5 seconds whenever you critically hit someone. I think I've mentioned it in the past, but Fortify in general is not as great as it once was, simply because how the formula of mitigating damage now works. Because it's not a direct reducing of damage, I think that this Fortify is not really useful, simply because 15% on your weapon is not even impactful while we are losing a complete perk slot for your weapon. And in my opinion, weapons should be focusing on offense and not so much on defense unless you're running a shield. So that's why I would put Keenly Fortified down to the D tier. So basically, yeah, I don't even feel like there is any kind of build that you can use it and of course benefit from it more than any other perk that you can slot on its place. The next one is Keenly Empowered, and as the name suggests, this one will give you 10% empower for 5 seconds whenever you critically hit someone. Now, for many builds, this might be useless perk, simply because you can reach Empower quite easily even without it. As I said, there are many ways to reach Empower cap, but for some builds, this can definitely be a nice choice. And for some builds as well, it's mandatory simply because it's already there. A quick example I can give you is the Inferno artifact. And now again, I'm referring to magical weapons, but this was the first that popped in my mind. So I think that keenly empowered can be useful in specific cases. Of course, not that many cases, and definitely not higher than the keenly jagged. And in my opinion, keenly empowered stays in the B tier. The next perk on the list is Keen Speed. Now this one is quite handy specifically for a couple of builds and specifically in, interesting situations. This perk will give you 15% haste for 7 seconds whenever you critically hit someone, and it has a 7 seconds cooldown, meaning that if you have a lot of crits, if you have a good uptime on your critical hits, you can almost keep it up the whole time. Now, for specific builds which are meant to run away from someone, it can be really handy, as I said, but it can also be used for specific builds which are chasing. You can also get this perk in like a special drop from the worm rate, which is not really a legal drop because this perk is usually for weapons, but in the worm rate you can find a lot of armor pieces which have weapon perks. So I would say that in those kind of builds which are utilizing it on the boots, in that case, in the heavy boots that you see on your screen, this perk can be extremely good. But when it comes to using it on your weapon, I don't think it passes even the C tier, simply because, again, it's not focused on damage. In my opinion, the damage perk should be focused on damage, and therefore I don't think it's that useful. The next two perks that we have on the list are Plague Crits and Plague Strikes. As you can see, they have both same icons, the effect is also the same, but the way of applying is a bit different. Plague Crits will be applied on critical hits, and it will apply a disease for 6 seconds, which will reduce the effectiveness of heals by 27% on the incoming and 14% on the outgoing. As you can imagine, if you are a melee and you are hitting your targets from the back, this perk will have almost 100% uptime simply because all the backstab hits are critical hits. That's why I think that this perk goes up to A tier. Many weapons are utilizing it, it's really useful, and therefore I think it's a really nice addition to your kit for your weapon. But let's take a look on Plague Strikes, because if Plague Crits is on A tier, where we should put Plague Strikes, which are applied by heavy attacks. And like I said, the disease is the same, with the only difference that the Plague Strikes are for 2 seconds longer. The Plague Crits is for 6 seconds, while Plague Strikes is for 8 seconds. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, there are a couple of weapons that are doing really quick heavy attacks. Sword and Shield is one of them, Warhammer is another, and a lot of people, if not everyone, who is aware of how perks work and how to, of course, prioritize their builds, would definitely choose Plague Strikes as a mandatory perk on those weapons, simply because there is no better thing than just reducing almost by half the healing effects on your target that you are pursuing. And I think that this Plague Strikes perk is just S tier without any doubts. Again, it's not about how many weapons can utilize it. It's just about the efficiency that this perk gives, especially on those 2 weapons, but of course maybe on some others as well. The next one on the list is Penetrating the Empower. This is relatively new perk to the list. It was introduced, if I remember correctly, with the free-for-all zone in Cutlass Keys. And this one is only to PvP. You cannot apply it in PvE, so have that in mind. This one will deal 10% increased damage, or let's say 10% armor penetration, and then respectively to damage, whenever you critically hit someone. So if you want to build something that is focusing on critical hits, if you want to penetrate 10% of your target's armor whenever you critically hit, this is probably one of the best perks. I don't think that it has that much of a value when it comes to raw damage, but over the long time, over the long run, maybe you can get a nice benefit from it. Now, I'm not really sure for melees how useful this perk is. For ranged, we will speak about it in a bit because we're gonna definitely see it there as well. But for melees, I don't think that this one goes above the B tier, simply because there are way better perks on its place. Going over to the next one, we have Purifying Crits, and I'm pretty sure that at this point you are asking yourself, what is this perk? I've never seen this one. Is this even a perk for a weapon? And yes, it is. This is a perk that exists for weapons for quite some time now. Again, same like the penetrating the empowered, it works only for PvP. And the effect of it is that whenever you critically hit someone, you will remove one of their buffs. This has an internal cooldown of 3 seconds, so of course, if you manage to keep a good uptime of critical hits, maybe you can strip your enemy's buffs quite often, quite quickly. But in my opinion, and probably that's the reason why you also don't know about this perk doesn't have any use in PvP because it's just not good enough. If it was stripping, let's say, 2 or 3 buffs at the same time and have the same cooldown, maybe it would have been a bit different. But stripping one buff from your enemy for 3 seconds cooldown in between on a critical hit only, and then it doesn't give you anything back in terms of like extra damage or something. I don't see how this perk can, take the spot of all the other perks above it. So that's why purifying crits, I think it just remains down in the D tier. And the last perk from the perk bucket is the one that's called exhausted exploitation. Again, like the couple of perks before it, this one only works with PvP, and the effect is that whenever you hit an exhausted player, you inflict a slow to him, reducing the movement speed by 15% for the next 4 seconds. If you hit the target in the back, you inflict exhaust as well, reducing their stamina regen by 10% for 8 seconds. Now it's quite a long, detailed explanation and information about this perk, but in general, just to explain it a bit better, whenever a target doesn't have stamina on him, you will be able to apply 15% slow because he is exhausted. And then if you are hitting a target in the back, you would inflict exhaust effect, which is basically reducing his stamina regen. It doesn't mean that when you inflict the exhaust effect, you would also get the movement speed reduction. Just to clarify it, because probably some of you are thinking, if I'm hitting someone from the back, I'm instantly giving him a 15% slow. No, it's not the case. I've tested it long time ago. Maybe it was changed. Maybe it was changed. You can hit me up on stream and I can maybe test it live, but I just don't think it works like that. And I think that it's literally the same as I've tested it before. So this perk, again, unfortunately, goes down to the D tier. And it's not really useful. It's not that common as well. You can definitely see that many people are just avoiding it for that same purpose, and I don't think it's that useful. And now, since we went through 2 of the main perk buckets, we cannot pass to mention the next one, which is the elemental one. And in my opinion, this is another really core and really important perk bucket for which almost every single player in the game is currently using one of those perks. So as you can see, there is quite a lot of elemental perks. Of course, this is the elemental perk bucket. And the first one on the list will be the Shirking Flames. Now, all of those shirking perks that we're gonna speak about are basically triggered after dodging an enemy attack, and for the next 10 seconds you will deal increased base damage on your first attack, regardless if that's a light, heavy, or a ability attack. Now, as you can imagine, if you are using a build which is on the front line and it's dodging quite a lot of the enemy's attacks, this can be really handy perk as it will boost your damage quite a lot. Another really good potential of those perks is that they don't have cooldown, which means that on every dodge that you do, as long as you hit afterwards and trigger the effect, you will be able to re-trigger it non-stop, so therefore you would get a lot of damage. I personally think that all those shirking nature or shirking frost or shirking flames, basically all the elements shirkings, can be quite useful, and a lot of bruisers are actually using those perks quite efficiently as well. So that's why I'm putting all of them in the A tier. Why all of them? Well, simply because, like I said, the effect is literally the same. And now you might be thinking that, oh, but somebody can run more fire protection than other, or maybe more void and so on. I personally think that the damage difference would not be that significant, especially with the current meta where most of the people are running oppos and not really specific one type of element due to other reasons, but we will not go into those details. The next element perks, which are again in 4 different types of elements, will be the attunements. And same as the shirking ones, they have the same, of course, way of working and the same effects. All of the shirkings are procced on dodge, but attunements are procced on basic attacks, abilities, or heavy attacks, and they have an internal cooldown of 1.5 seconds. Attunement, however, cannot proc by dots, so have that in mind if you are playing a dot build. And the first one on the line will be Flame Attunement, but like I said, the Frost, the Arboreal, and of course the Abyssal, which is Void and Nature, the last two, they all work the same way. In my opinion, those perks were also quite a nice addition for damage users, for people that want to get extra damage. Depending on your base damage of the weapon that you use, you can probably reach to 200, even 300 sometimes extra damage. So those perks are really handy, and I would say that they are somewhere between A and even S tier, let's say high A to maybe low S tier, of course dependent on the weapon. Now, if you play as a bruiser, I would say that you should probably avoid the attunement, but if you play as a spear guy, or maybe you want to just get extra damage on your hatchet or something like this, you know, it all depends on the build. It all depends on what you aim to achieve, and that's why I would put it somewhere there between A and S tier, and you can of course choose for yourself what is the better thing. Now, the next perk on the list, which is also considered as element, which is kind of strange to me, but there we go. We have it in the same perk bucket, is the new addition from the last season, and this is Sundering Stacks. Now, for those of you who are not aware what exactly Sundering Stacks is, every 0.5 seconds, your attacks, regardless if that's a light, heavy, or an ability, your attacks will apply a 4% rend to your target, and this rend will last for 6 seconds, with the maximum potential of stacks being 5. Now, as you can imagine, this is huge because you can stack potentially 20% rend, which is reducing the enemy value of armors by 20%. And for weapons that are hitting quick enough to trigger the effect every 0.5 seconds, this can be basically the best perk ever. This was also the reason why this perk was going for close to 200,000 when it dropped out with the new addition, and that's why I'm also not gonna place it nowhere outside than the S tier, because in my opinion this perk is just significantly better than most of the perks that you see on your screen, and of course not suitable for any type of build, but definitely suitable for most of the builds, especially the ones that can utilize it in the form of assassination and so on. The next label or perk bucket that we have to speak about has only a couple of perks, and this is the one for blocking. Now, you might be a bit confused, why are we going to speak about blocking when we are speaking about weapons and not shields? But I will try to explain it really quickly. Blocking perks, such as the ones that we're gonna look at now, which are Sturdy, Sure Footing, and Fractured Rend, are basically perks which can also be slotted on your weapon as well as your shield. I'm not really sure what exactly is the reason for this, but this is how it works from the very beginning of the game, and therefore we have those perks still sometimes dropping on different weapons, which kind of makes them useless, but for some of them, of course, you can find like a niche way of using them. So let's take a quick look. Sturdy is the first one that we're gonna take a look at, and this one basically will reduce the stamina damage which you're gonna get after blocking. Now, just a quick explanation, if you don't dodge an enemy attack, but you just prefer to block it, you would still receive really low amounts of damage, but at the same time you will lose a little bit of stamina compared to dodging and losing 50. Of course, some builds definitely prefer to dodge because they utilize weapons which have better blocking potential, and technically all of the weapons which are two-handed, like the Great Axe, like the Warhammer, the Greatsword, and so on, they have a really strong blocking potential. Now, if you have this perk on them, it would even make it better, but in my opinion, this perk, as mentioned, is quite useless simply because it's not suitable for weapons, it's more suitable for shields, and like I said already a couple of times, weapons should be prioritizing and focusing damage over some kind of niche effects. The next one is the Sure Footing, and this one will basically provide you with 30% movement speed while you're blocking, and push and pull distances against you will be reduced by 20%. Push and pull could be, of course, like the pull from the Scorpio spear, or the same normal spear that can throw a javelin and push you back a little bit. Now, if we have to be honest, like, this is a complete joke. I don't think that anyone would want to have this perk on their weapon, so therefore there is nothing to discuss about it. We just place it down to the D tier. And the last one is the Fracture Trend. Now this one is a bit more interesting. Same as a couple of other perks, this one only is in PvP. You cannot use that in PvE. So the effect of this one is when you break a blocking player's block. So basically someone is blocking, you make the last hit of his block and his stamina is now gone. You will inflict rend, reducing his armor by 16% for 6 seconds. And now if we just have to think about it for a second, why would I have to put a perk that will require so many things to happen so I can eventually break someone's shield for those 16%, instead of just using the Trenchant Rend that we mentioned a couple of minutes ago? So that's why I think that Fracture Trend also goes down to the bin in the D tier. Quite useless perk. I hope that in the future they will rework those, they will make even better variations of them, or just change them and put something else on their slot, because they are really not useful at the moment, and I don't think this will change anytime soon. The next perk bucket that we have to speak about is the one that has the label on kill. Now, as you can imagine, on kill means that something has to die in order to get the effects of this. And if you watched my previous video about the perks on the armor, you would already know that we discussed those perks, simply because the game developers decided to split those perks on both the weapons and the armor pieces, so probably some of the perks will be familiar. The first one is Mortal Lifesteal, and as the name suggests, this one will give you back 11% of your max HP on a kill, while you can also benefit 2.8% lifesteal while you are, of course, hitting targets. Now, if you are running a build that is specifically designed to lifesteal and you also utilize other perks such as lifestealing or Trenchant Recovery, maybe this perk would be really nice and it would be, of course, helpful and useful. But in my opinion, especially with the latest changes where this perk doesn't proc the Healing Breeze anymore, I think that this is quite useless perk, simply because 11% is not even that big of a portion when it comes to HP recovery, and the condition to kill someone is quite a hard task, especially if you play against good players, so I would say that this one goes down to the D tier. The next one is Mortal Energy, and without wasting too much of your time, I basically think the same. The effect of this one will give you 50 stamina on kill, but again, killing a target is not so easy, so I would just drop it down to the D tier. The next is Mortal Fortification, and yeah, I mean, there is not much to be said. Basically, in my opinion, all those Mortal perks are just not that great when it comes to effect, especially when the condition is a kill, and the kill has to be done by you. This is also something that I must mention, because if it was also, let's say, on assistance, it could have been a bit of a different scenario, but being on kill means that you have to be the one to secure that kill in order to gain, of course, the different benefits of those perks. And that's why I think that this kind of makes them completely useless. So hopefully they will get changed in the future, maybe to also work on assist, or maybe just change something with their values and have something in addition to it. I don't know. Okay, so we are left with 4 perks which don't really have they technically have a perk bucket, but they are alone in their perk buckets. Those perks, of course, are Penetrating Backstab, Vorpal, Keen, and Hated. Now, Penetrating Backstab has its own perk bucket, like I said, it's called Damage Type. In my opinion, this perk for melee weapon is technically S tier without any doubt. This perk again works only on PvP, it doesn't have any effect on PvE, but simply when you hit a target from the back, or technically backstabbing him, you would penetrate 27% of the armor of that person. Now, as you can imagine, those numbers are extremely high, and this is one of the reasons why many, if not every single one, player, with the exception of Great Sword, Great Axe, and Hammer, is literally using this perk. You can see it on spears, you can see it on hatchets, you can see it on rapiers, you can see it on sword and shields. It's just an amazing perk to have, and definitely, in my opinion, is S tier without any doubt. The other one, Vorpo, is really specific one, and you can only see this one, I believe, on hatchets. The reason for that is because Vorpo gives you damage increase to headshots, if I'm not mistaken. And if you are wondering why we are even talking about like headshots from range when we are speaking about melee weapons, well, simply because you can throw hatchets. You can throw hatchets in the game, and that's why this perk can proc on your hatchet. That's why I put it here, just so you can see it. Those are the special conditions, like the unique perks that I was talking about in the beginning. But as you can imagine, nobody wants to have that many requirements to their build just so they can get a small benefit. So I think that Vorpo is not that great and therefore goes into the D tier. The next perk on the list is Keen, and as I said, it has its own perk bucket, which is called, of course, critical. And why it's critical? Well, because it provides critical chance up to 7.3%. Now, in my opinion, this perk can be handy for ranged and magical weapons, but when it comes to melees, I think that it's a completely useless perk. Now, before judging me, let me just try to give my reasoning for it. Every melee weapon can literally critically hit every single hit as long as it's a backstab, and even if you don't critically hit and do backstabs, you basically have really high base damage but a bit lower critical damage, which kind of makes it useless for you to chase this potential of critical hits. That's why I think that Keen perk basically goes down to the D tier, simply because for melee weapons I don't think that it's useful both for PvP and for PvE, especially for PvE because you can always go in the back of the mob and just guarantee your critical hit. And then of course the last one, it's quite an interesting one, and that's the hated perk, which has its own perk bucket called Threat. Now this one will increase the threat that you make by 245%. And as you can imagine, if you are a tank and you are running mutations, you definitely want to keep the aggro on you. You want the mobs to be on you and not your friends. So if we speak about PvE, this perk goes up here to S tier. But if we speak about PvP, the only hatred that you're gonna get will be from the people in your team, because this is the worst perk that you can get for PvP. So depending on what do you guys prefer to play with this perk, if it's PvE S tier, if it's PvP D tier, I personally don't slot it anywhere, but yeah, just pick and choose and decide for yourself. And since we went over all the perks for the melee weapons, now we need to take a look on the ones for the magical and for the ranged weapons as well. As you can already tell, the melees had way more perks compared to the ranged and the magical weapons, and in my opinion the main reason for that is because some of the perks would have been completely broken if they were on ranged weapons. We've seen a couple of cases in the past due to wrong patches or wrongly placed perks on the weapons, so we definitely want to avoid those. And without further ado, let's just start with the first perk bucket, which again will be the damage con. So the first perk already known to you is Vicious. I will try to go quicker this time simply because we know all the perks and what exactly they do. I will still put the info on the right side, but just to be quicker for you. Now Vicious for the melees was quite low ranked, let's say, but in my opinion for ranged and for magical weapons it could be standing on A tier, simply because most of the weapons which are using it can of course get high critical damage, and especially for that fact I think that Vicious is a nice perk. Of course it's not a top tier perk and not priority, but if you don't have anything better in that case, or you just have a cheaper option on the market, then it's definitely a useful one. Enchanted, as I've mentioned, is also a really nice perk, but here we see even higher value. If we speak about Fire Staff or Ice Gauntlet, maybe it's not that high, maybe around A tier, but when it comes to muskets and for bows, I think this is an extremely good perk. Maybe I'm completely wrong with this, but again, this is just my feeling and opinion about it. So I would put Enchanted on S tier simply because of that. The next one is, of course, disdained infliction. And as I said, if you are focused on dots, if you are focused on, let's say, even bleeds and things like this, or even the poison from the bow, I think that disdained infliction could be a really nice thing. But again, my opinion remains the same. Dot builds are not so powerful and not so significant when it comes to PvP. So therefore, I think that disdained infliction is just not that great when it comes to PvP due to that fact. The next one, and probably my favorite perk of all, is the Alacritus Punishment. Now this perk is only applicable in PvP and it will give 15% increased damage to players with haste. This perk is exclusive for magical weapons only. You cannot have it in your bow, you cannot have it in your musket, but you can have it on your Void Gauntlet, you can have it on your Fire Staff and Ice Gauntlet. In my opinion, this perk is extremely good and it's not even S, it's like S++ tier at this point. And if you are buying a magical weapon and the magical weapon doesn't have this perk, you are losing on a lot potential damage. So in my opinion, top of the top, Alacritus Punishment S+. Then the next one we have Desperate Empower. We already spoke about this perk, we know how it works, we know the effects of it. I don't think it's worth it to waste your stamina and to put yourself in danger by not being able to dodge or block for the next couple of seconds, just so you can get a small bits and pieces of Empower. There are other ways to get Empower, so I would personally not recommend you to run this perk. Going over to the next perk bucket, that would be again the proc bucket, and of course we have almost the same, if not the same entries. Refreshing Move, an amazing perk that can reduce your cooldowns. Not really useful for most of the ranged and magical weapons, but in some cases you can definitely make it work. I even tried out myself in a couple of builds. I would say it could be a bit of a B or maybe lower A tier, something like this, like B+, A-, somewhere there, but just to be sure, I would put it around the B tier, so I would not really lie to you. Then the next one is the lifestealing. In my opinion, if you are playing a range, it doesn't matter which weapon you're gonna choose, either that be the bow and the musket or you're gonna go with the magical ones. Lifesteal is not really your best option. If you play Void and you are going with the Void Blade, but at this point I might consider you as a melee and not really a range, then you might find like a little bit of extras with the lifesteal, but if you just play on range and distance, I definitely think that lifestealing is not the way to go, so I would put it down to C tier. The next perk is Keenly Jacked, and as we already mentioned, this perk is based on your base damage of the weapon, meaning that the higher the base damage of your weapon is, the bigger the damage of the dot of bleed will be. In my opinion, this perk is S tier when it comes down to muskets and bows, and it could be also A tier when it comes to Fire Staff, especially when people are playing with Finisher as a secondary weapon due to those 15% increased damage when target is bleeding. Now the next one is Keenly Fortified, and you already know my opinion on the Fortify in the game, especially when it's from your weapon. If it's from my armor pieces, maybe I can take a look at it, but when it's coming from my weapon, I think it's completely waste of perk slot, and of course it's not really useful. The next one is Keenly Empowered. Again, not the greatest, not the worst as well. It can give you a small bits of empower. I don't think it's worth it to have it, especially if you need to force it on your own. But if it's already in your artifact, like I gave the example with the Inferno, you cannot really do much about it. So I would say that B, maybe like minus, B minus, C plus, somewhere there might be the case. Keen Speed is our next entry. And in my opinion, Keen Speed can be quite handy for specific builds, but at the same time, especially when you play range, I think that ideally you want to have the maximum damage possible so you can definitely kill the target before it reaches you. That's why I think that Keen Speed, especially for ranged users, is not really useful unless it's on your secondary weapon, but then of course we are speaking about different combinations and conditions. So therefore I would say that Keen Speed can be at best around C tier, but just to be sure I would put it on D tier because you really don't want to have that on your weapon. The next one is Play Crits, and as we already know, this one we will apply Disease. The difference between the mage or the magical weapons and the ranged weapons with the melee weapons is that you only have Plague Crits in the form of Disease. You cannot run Plague Strikes, for example. So therefore, I think that play crits here will go a bit higher and it will end in A tier, simply because if you want to apply disease on your targets and to put some anti-healing effects on them, you don't really have another choice. That's your only option. So play crits, in my opinion, is a really good perk, and especially for those 1v1 scenarios, it could be quite useful. The next one is penetrating the empower, and as we mentioned already, this one is only PvP related, and technically your critical hits against empowered players, which is basically everyone, will have 10% armor penetration and reduce their empowers, but it will be only 7%, so I don't even read the second part of the perk because it's quite useless. So do we really want to get a little bit of extra damage on a range? Yes, as I said, we already want to get the maximum damage efficiency, so therefore I think that penetrating the empower can be slotted easily on the B tier and to have it there, of course, for extra damage. The next one and the last from this perk bucket is the exhausted exploitation. And as we already mentioned how this perk works, I just don't think it's worth it. I think it definitely stays down in the D tier. There is not much to be said about it. I really don't feel like there is any build that can utilize it. So in my opinion, just ignore this perk. The next section of perks, again as you can see with all the elements below, are the ones for the elemental types. Again, same as the Meles, we have shirkings and of course attunements. Now all of the shirking perks were really good, especially for bruisers or frontliners that will consistently dodge attacks and then hit people so they can re-trigger the effect and so on. But when it comes to ranged users, I don't think that shirking any type of element is basically that useful. In some builds or some artifacts, like for example the Boltcaster, you have a shirking element perk, but I don't think anyone would want to force it on its own. So therefore, I personally think that all the shirking elements perks will basically go to the C tier. Now, of course, if you are playing some niche build that you really want to dodge and to apply the extra damage effects to the person when you hit them, I would not stop you, but if you really ask my opinion, I would never run such perk on my weapon. So that's why I think that they don't deserve more than the C tier. When it comes to the attunements, however, as we can see down here, the 4 different types, I think that those are extremely efficient perks, and same as the melee weapons, I would put them on S tier, not only because they are useful for 1 or 2 weapons, but they are quite useful for all of the different weapons when it comes to magical or musket and bow. I think that attunement is a really nice addition, again, for additional damage, so therefore you should definitely not sleep on those perks and use them whenever you get the chance. And of course, the last perk and the newest addition, like I've said earlier, is the Sundering Stacks, which also belongs to the elemental types. Sundering Stacks, as I said, is a ridiculously strong perk. So even with the nerf, what they did to it, I think it's extremely good, especially for ranged weapons, because you are able to apply those rends even from distance, which makes it even harder for your enemies to fight you, because you're gonna deal more and more damage with every second hit. So that's why I also think that this one belongs to the S tier, and without a doubt, it would take the spot for sure on my weapon. Now going for the last perk bucket before we go to the unique ones, we have again the perks which are labeled as on kill. Now we don't need to fall into details, but basically all of those perks which are the mortal lifesteal, the mortal energy, the mortal fortification, the mortal power, and of course the mortal refreshment are all completely useless perks. If you have a weapon that has this perk, please sell it to someone or just drop it on the floor. This is complete trash and it would not have any benefit. So any other perk that you have would be way better than those perks. I unfortunately have to say that, but I know it hurts. I've seen a lot of people using those perks. Believe me, it's a complete waste. It's not worth it and you are losing a lot of potential. Okay, last 2 perks on the list, we have Keen and we have Vorpal. Like I've said already about the Vorpal, it's basically extra damage on targets when you hit a headshot. So as you can imagine, this one is quite useful for bows and muskets, but this one cannot be applied to magical weapons. So if you think that you are a really good shooter and you basically had 10,000 hours in Counter-Strike with AK-47, probably you should play this perk on S tier, but in my opinion, I think that this perk doesn't really go above B tier, maybe even B is a bit high for it. but let's just place it there because rush B suka blять. And then the last perk that we have, of course, is the Keen on its own perk bucket, which is called Critical. And like I said earlier, Keen had a really nice impact on critical builds. It also had like a bigger value in the past at 12% if I remember correctly, but lately it kind of dropped down. Unfortunately here we don't see Keen that much used as well as on the melees, simply because there are better perks when it comes to base damage increase and when it comes to effects. Of course, you can run Keen so you can guarantee crits, because compared to the melees, you cannot really proc critical hits when you hit people from the back. You cannot really apply a backstab. So if you're really dependent on critical hits, if you really want to see critical numbers, I would say that you can go for A tier. But then if you are not so, focused on criticals, I think that you can definitely slot it on B tier and just prioritize other perks which will give you base value on a higher number. And now the last piece of today's puzzle, which will be the healing weapon perks. And as you can see on your screen, there are not that many perks, and there is of course a reason for that, because if you are running any healing weapon, and for the moment that's definitely the life staff, because the flail and the void gauntlet can support you with some heals, but not so strongly. I think that there are not many options when it comes to life staff. Of course, I'm not a healer main, I played it just for a couple, maybe 100 hours, but yeah, I think that most of the healers are running exactly the same combo when it comes to their life staffs. And of course, as you can see here, we again have not that many perks. The first one, and probably the most desirable and mandatory perk on your life staff, would be Blessed, because this one will increase your outgoing healing efficiency by 12%, and you cannot really play a healer without this one. Like, you are basically putting your team into quite a lot of trouble if you are not having this perk. So therefore this is a mandatory S tier perk. Then we have Savior. Now this one is quite a good one, but I will put it on A tier and I will tell you really quickly why. There is a set of items that I've mentioned earlier which are dropping from the worm rate, and there you have illegal combinations with perks from the weapons being placed on the armor pieces. So you can acquire this Savior perk on a light helmet, and therefore I think that it's not mandatory to have it on your weapon. But if you really cannot get to the worm and you really cannot kill it, but you still want to run Savior because your healing is increased by 20% when you heal someone below 50% HP, then definitely you can use it. However, my suggestion would be do your best, try to get into Worm Run, and then of course test your luck, or with the necessary provided materia, you can craft this piece on an armoring bench. The next one is the Desperate Prayer, and this one will basically give you 20% more effective heals whenever you are below 50% mana. But of course, because it's on the same perk bucket as the Blessed and the Savior, you cannot really have it on the same item, meaning your weapon. So I would say that this perk is not that good. I would put it down to C tier, simply because you don't want to be below 50% mana and you don't want to remove your Blessed from the life staff. The next perk on the list is basically Purifying Breeze. It's a perk alone in its own perk bucket called Proc 2, which is quite strange. It's not with the regular proc perks, but still. And this one will heal for 33% weapon damage every time you remove a debuff from an ally. Now, there are a couple of ways to remove debuffs from your allies. It's either by heavy attacks or specific abilities. So I think that you can definitely run this one on your life staff. I would say that it's probably A tier. In some cases, it might even be S tier, especially if you run Clap. But this I leave it to you. So my opinion is that it's A plus, maybe S minus. But sorry if I'm choosing the wrong place for that perk. As I said, I'm not a healer main. And then the last perk that you see basically on your screen, but not the last that you can slot on your life staff, of course, is the Refreshing Move. And this, I also think that it's quite a mandatory perk, because every light attack or heavy attack that you do on enemies will refresh your cooldowns, meaning that your abilities will come quicker. Now, of course, there are builds that are using double single target heals, and they don't really have the time to use light and heavy attacks. so therefore this perk will drop significantly for them in terms of use. But I still believe that it requires, quite a lot of hits to refresh your abilities and to make it even smoother when you want to continuously drop those sacred grounds. So that's why I would also put it on A tier, with, of course, the idea that it can even go to S if you play as an AoE healer. Now you might be thinking, yeah, but what can I slot as a third perk on my life staff if I go, for example, for Blessed and Refreshing Move, but I don't want to play Breeze? Well, here is the time where we need to mention that for all that video, we didn't even mention the weapon perks, and the weapon perks are really specific to the builds that you are playing. It really depends on your class, it really depends on your combination of weapons, it really depends on your playstyle, and that's why I didn't went into the details of explaining why some weapon perks are better than others, because there are so many different combinations and variants that if I say that a perk is really good, but then someone is playing it completely different, it might be completely useless for him, and vice versa. That's why have one thing in mind, that weapon perks can be an amazing fit, but also can be a horrible fit for your weapon. So make sure before slotting it on your weapon to know what exactly you are aiming to get and to know the result, of course, beforehand. In my opinion, weapon perks, specifically for the life staff in that case, can be a great addition, and most of the healers, if not all of them, are using weapon perks. But for example, if I'm playing a fire staff, I would not really prioritize weapon perk, simply because I want to get the maximum raw damage that I can do on my fire staff, and then if I need weapon perks, I can simply slot them on my armor. And with that, I think that I've covered all the different perks when it comes to the different types of weapons, such as the melees, ranged and magical ones, and of course, last but not least, the life staff and all the healing ones. Now, of course, I'm pretty sure that I've missed quite a lot of the things, and you can definitely tell me in the comments what would you want to know and what you didn't get the answer to. But that's the whole point of it, guys, and I think that at least the information that I provided you would be efficient and useful in your future gameplay of New World Aeternum. Again, I highly recommend you to support the channel by subscribing to it and also to join our Discord, simply because you're gonna get quite a lot of valuable information for the game completely free, and you can always ask your questions regarding builds, playstyles, or anything else 24/7 basically. So thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed. I will be posting more of those videos with different type of guides and of course basic things, and I really wish that you would have nice time in Aeternum. See you on the next one.